In 1963, the biggest act in the world of entertainment was the Beatles, and their manager was a 29-year-old furniture salesman from North England named Brian Epstein. Brian had discovered the Beatles a couple of years earlier and, bored with his work in the furniture store, had offered to manage them. But neither he nor anyone else ever dreamed he would have such success in virtually his first outing as a manager. That year, producers from United Artists decided to feature the Beatles in their first movie and were prepared to pay them as much as 25% of the profits. They met with Brian and asked him what percentage of the profits he thought would be fair. Now, Brian didn't know the movie business at all and hadn't done anything to learn about it. But wanting to look savvy, Brian drew himself up and said confidently, "I should warn you now, I'm not prepared to settle for less than 7.5%. For that, he said, he was willing to agree to let all the rights eventually revert to the producers personally. The producers quickly agreed. Because the movie, A Hard Day's Night, proved to be a delightful worldwide success, Brian's mistake cost the group millions. Worse, Brian was so distraught by this and other negotiation mistakes he made, and so concerned that the Beatles would discover it and fire him, that it apparently accelerated his drug use, which may have led to his early death. We've all been Brian on a lesser scale. I know I have. Many years ago, I took my fiancée to buy an engagement ring. I'd done little to learn about the industry or the market. First place we visit, the guy immediately asks, "What's your price range?" So I tell him $2,000 to $4,000. He brings out a tray of rings. "Just tell me if you see one you love," he tells my fiancée. She quickly finds one. He asks her, "Do you love it? Do you love it?" "Yes," she says. "Clearly we're going to be buying this ring." "So, how much is it?" I ask. Would you believe it was exactly $4,000? Only years later did I learn that the store is famous for lousy value and that I didn't have a clue how to tell whether a ring was well priced or not. We've all bought things thinking we were getting a good deal, only to discover later that we didn't understand the situation at all. Our natural tendency is to think that skilled negotiation is largely about looking smart, masking any weakness with savvy-sounding talk. That was the strategy Brian used. I've used it too. Not a good strategy. His story illustrates the critical importance of research in negotiation, the ability to learn things before a negotiation. And so in this session, we'll explore why most skilled negotiators are very strong researchers and how you can harness the power of knowledge in different ways. Why is research so important? First of all, good research gives you perspective. It helps you know what's fair, what's favorable, what's barely tolerable, and what's simply out of the question. Just knowing the norms would have protected Brian. Knowing what other choices there were in the market would have protected me. Second, good research is one of the best protections you have against being mistreated or misled by another negotiator. As top sports agent Bob Wolf put it, you have to establish the reputation for being smart and honest. I find out everything I can before a negotiation. Knowledge is power. Wolf speaks from experience. He would routinely trade information with other sports agents about salaries and other compensation athletes were receiving from sports clubs, keeping detailed files he could draw on immediately. He would actually go to a meeting with the general manager and say, "Now I want to make sure that I'm being completely reasonable with my requests. So I took the liberty of finding out what each athlete on your payroll is currently receiving. Here's the list. I'd be grateful if you'd review it and let me know if there are any errors in it." Sometimes, he said, general managers would say, "Can we have a copy of this sheet, please? We don't have anything like it." In the process, Wolf was signaling both his reasonableness and his readiness. His counterparts were not going to kid him, knowing how prepared he was. Third, good research helps you listen better. At the close of the 1996 Olympic Games in Atlanta, International Olympic Committee President Juan Antonio Samaranch gave his traditional closing address. There he said, I wish to congratulate the city of Atlanta for these Olympic Games. They were extraordinary. You love them, right? But as the well-prepared commentator noted during the broadcast, Juan Antonio Samaranch had given an almost identical speech at the close of every previous Olympic Games for many previous years. In each event, he had said this: I wish to congratulate the city of blank for these Olympic Games. They were extraordinary and the best ever. He didn't say the best ever in Atlanta. Why not? Well, for one thing, there'd been a bombing that killed someone. What was he really saying then? These Olympic Games were mediocre. But you would only know that if you were well prepared. That kind of preparation can reveal, among other things, what the other person is not saying, which often tells you more than what he is saying. The power of this kind of preparation, this kind of research, may help explain why trial attorneys are much more effective listening to witness testimony than you and I are. It's because they're extraordinarily well prepared to do so. It's another reason why we're in the process of developing your ability to prepare well to negotiate. Fourth, in any negotiation where the stakes are high or the matter is complex, researching the numbers and the details can save you from hidden traps and troubles. Throughout our course, we'll encounter firms and executives who got into trouble because they didn't master the fine print and the numbers. Wall Street firms that invested heavily in mortgage-backed securities failed to calculate what would happen if mortgage defaults rose. Enron executives trusted their guts and raced to close deal after deal without checking the numbers, which led to disastrous investments costing hundreds of millions of dollars. Sony Pictures hired 2 Hollywood executives without checking to see if they had existing contracts with another studio. They did, and Sony wound up paying a fortune for it. Many cell phone users don't understand or research the meaning of their contracts and only discover later how bad they are. For example, many contracts don't prorate their early termination charges, so that even if you cancel just a couple of months early, you pay the same fee as if you canceled after the first month of the agreement. And most entrepreneurial ventures fail in large part because their founders don't understand the numbers and the terms and the key deals well enough. Sadly, they often only discover the consequences when it's too late to fix it. Many of the dot-com firms that failed in the year 2000 met that fate. Conversely, skilled negotiators avoid problems and traps by mastering numbers and other details inside out. I once spoke with a real estate finance expert who had dealt more than once with Donald Trump, Larry Silverstein, and other top real estate figures in the New York real estate market. What most impressed you about them? I asked. No matter what change we proposed to a deal, he said, they could immediately tell us what effect it would have on cash flow, taxes, profits, and other key financial terms, or they had an apprentice who could do it for them. That kind of readiness to understand and work with the numbers doesn't just happen. It takes skilled research, calculating your budget, doing what-if projections, working at cash flow, and other financial questions can uniquely reveal what works and what doesn't. Fifth, research is one of the best ways to build power when you feel powerless. Imagine someone offers you $1,000 for your clunker of a car, far more than the $500 you can get by scrapping it. Then you learn that you can donate it to a college for $2,500 as a tax break. That research increases your leverage and justifies asking the buyer for a 250% increase in his offer than what he first offered. Sixth, good research reveals hidden opportunities and possibilities. For example, imagine you'd like to buy an old house, but it costs $50,000 more than you can afford. Then your research reveals an obscure tax incentive for preserving historically significant houses like that one, an incentive that will save you $100,000 in taxes. And perhaps most important, good research builds your confidence and credibility. One of the reasons we feel so anxious when we're in a negotiation is because the anxiety is a symptom of our lack of information. I know as a teacher that when I don't really know very much and someone asks me a question in class, I tend to be more defensive. Counterintuitively, it's when I really know my stuff that I tend to be more relaxed and open to questions. The good news is that you already know a great deal about how to do research. In school, you learned early and often how to work with books, magazines, and other research sources. And of course, in the age of the World Wide Web, we've all become skilled researchers who do it every day. And so part of our task is simply to channel things you already do well toward your work as a negotiator. The starting point for good research is asking and answering good questions. Depending on what the matter is about, you may want to research answers to questions like these. What are the technical specifications? What does the contract say? What does the correspondence file say? What is the history of the relationship? What are the market rates and norms? What is the other negotiator like? What is her personality, her reputation, her culture, her nationality, her affiliations? What do people in her situation typically worry about, and what do they typically need? What do experts in the field recommend for negotiations like this? And so on and so on and so on. There's no one right or magic question to research, but it's best to err on the side of doing too much research rather than too little. Before he mediated the Camp David peace accords, President Jimmy Carter ordered from the NSA and reviewed briefing books about Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Egyptian President Anwar Sadat that included profiles of their medical history and a detailed review of their biography and personality. Each book ran several hundred pages long. Scott Boras, the sports agent who represents many of the top Major League Baseball players, built a $20 million facility in Newport Beach, California, for his operation. And while much of the space went to other agents, it also included extensive space for statisticians and economists who help Boras and his team develop exhaustive information as they prepare for talks. This preparation helps Boras negotiate deals that are sometimes worth more than $100 million. The deep and persistent need for information and diplomacy is one of the key reasons why nations devote so much energy and time and money to intelligence gathering. During the Cold War, the United States devoted a great deal of energy to Kremlinology, the effort to understand what's going on behind the walls of the Kremlin and so better know how to deal with the Soviet Union. Kremlinology was put to the fullest test during the Cuban Missile Crisis. There, our ability or inability to understand and test the truthfulness of the Soviets shaped much of the story. Early in the crisis, Kennedy had a meeting with Soviet Ambassador Dobrynin. Kennedy had just received unmistakable evidence from the CIA that Soviet-made nuclear missiles were being assembled in Cuba and, without revealing this information, Kennedy asked Dobrynin if the Soviets were installing missiles there. Dobrynin assured Kennedy that the Soviets were not installing new offensive nuclear weapons there. Kennedy thanked Dobrynin, ended the meeting, and realized that the Soviets were lying to him. Later, the Kennedy administration presented evidence to the world to debunk Soviet claims that the United States was driving the conflict. Does this sort of work help in day-to-day negotiations? Very much so. As you may recall from the first minutes of our first lecture, my student Steve's research revealed a key fact about a car dealer who refused to repair his rusted car. The car dealer claimed that a third-party warranty company was contractually responsible, but that it had gone bankrupt. Then Steve learned that the bankrupt warranty company was owned by the car dealer. That one fact changed everything. When Steve calmly raised it with the dealer quickly agreed and gave him $1,500 to fully repair the car. So how might you apply the power of research to a simple negotiation? Imagine that you've just arrived at the Alpha Hotel, a 4-star hotel in Chicago, and that you've overheard the clerk telling guests in front of you that the hotel is overbooked. The clerk tells the other guests that the Alpha will give them a free taxi ride to a nearby Pier hotel, cover the difference in cost, and call them the next day if a room opens up at the Alpha. You feel as though you're going to face the same problem, so before you speak to the clerk, you step out of line and do some preparation. Part of that work involves factual research. So, you call your credit card company and ask them several questions about the situation, including, What is industry practice when a four-star hotel overbooks? How should they normally treat guests in a situation like that? Imagine the credit card company tells you that normally four-star hotels offer at least one free night at a nearby peer hotel, sometimes even 2 nights, depending on the situation. Does that information help? No guarantee, but as you can imagine, it has the potential to dramatically shift the bargaining leverage in your favor. Now you can go to the clerk and say very politely, I know you want to be fair, and so do I. So to be sure I'm being fair, I did a little learning. I learned from my credit card company that it's standard practice for other excellent hotels to offer 1 or 2 free nights at a peer hotel in a situation like this. Since the Alpha is an excellent hotel too, I wonder if it would be fair, if that would be a fair way to handle the situation. Let's consider now some offbeat, common, but non-obvious ideas for improving your ability to do factual and financial research. Keep in mind that we're talking now about doing research before you talk to the other negotiator. That's very different from asking the other negotiator questions. As we've seen, asking good questions is valuable in its own right, but it's a very different task. Here, we're talking about getting answers beforehand. One of the most quick and rich ways to learn a lot is to do phone fact finding. That is, call someone knowledgeable who can answer a lot of research questions reliably. An industry expert, for example, an agent, a lawyer, a professor, a very experienced friend in the business. So, for example, a traveler can learn a lot from a travel agent, a job seeker from a former employee. A related and powerful research method is something called information interviewing. Here, instead of looking for one magic conversation, you call several people you know and people they refer you to, asking them various research questions and developing a composite picture of the situation. This way, you can acquire the wisdom of many. Of course, a warning about working with people who can be discreet particularly applies here. A third powerful idea is to play with spreadsheets. This includes doing things like calculating your budget, using online tools to calculate what your cash flow is, what your taxes are, and the like, and what they'll be. Doing what-if scenario calculations to find out how different deals affect the numbers in different ways. This sort of research is particularly critical in important financial transactions, such as when you're borrowing money, starting a business, considering a job offer, or buying a house or a car. This brings us to the importance of doing research for competitive advantage by learning as much as you reasonably can about market prices and other terms. For example, you're about to negotiate, imagine you're about to negotiate the terms of a new job. Then it can be a very good idea to look online for salary surveys. Don't settle for broad national averages. Look for data that is as current and as precise as you can find. No guarantee, but often, as my students and friends have found, you can find a lot of hidden gems. Hidden gems brings me to one of my favorite kinds of research, and that is doing research from the perspective of the other negotiator. For example, if you're about to negotiate the terms of a job, it can be very illuminating to read websites and blogs written for human resource professionals. Look for material that helps your counterpart negotiate with their vendors, their candidates, their suppliers, doing it more effectively. Doing that can reveal key facts about your counterpart's strategies, their worries, going rates, and more. Sometimes this sort of research can help you discover insights about the other person's organization, affiliations, beliefs, and more, all of which can illuminate your work as a negotiator generally. Now, there are some dangers to doing research. They shoot spies in wartime, and similarly, asking the wrong person for the wrong information at the wrong time can get you into trouble. So keep in mind a couple of warnings about inappropriate research. You want to be careful not to ask a question that might be unethical, improper, or illegal to learn. Trying to find out information about somebody's marital status, sexuality, psychological health, and so on may often be outside the bounds. It's also a bad idea to ask questions of a third party who might relay those questions back to your counterpart. You definitely don't want to meet your top customer and hear her say, I hear you're trying to find out from my clients whether they're satisfied with my services. Is that true? And if you're doing research for an organization, asking the wrong questions of the wrong people could trigger privacy issues or political problems for the firm and for you. So use your judgment as you research. One particularly powerful type of research is discovering information that can serve as independent criteria. Many years ago, I wanted to sell a car. So I put a sign in the window, and someone called to talk to me about it, about buying it. We met, and he looked the car over for a little while, and he finally said, "I'll give you $6,000 for it." Now, frankly, I didn't know anything really about negotiating back then or selling cars, but I happened to have a copy of the Blue Book Guide to Used Car Prices. So I said, well, I don't know. This copy of the Blue Book says that a car with this make, model, and mileage usually sells for $8,000. Here, take a look. He looked at it for a few seconds, and then he said, "I'll give you $7,500 for it." Now, what caused a used car buyer to raise his price $1,500 in 10 seconds? A simple, powerful type of preparation called an independent criterion. An independent criterion is anything, a benchmark, a rule, and so forth, that both sides feel is fair. It's anything that lets you say, don't take my word for it, let's find a reasonable way to agree what's appropriate here. It's powerful for several reasons. First, it's face-saving. It doesn't make the negotiation a test of wills, and it doesn't ask the other person to back down. As we'll see throughout the course, finding ways to help the other person save face is often crucial in negotiations. Face is actually one of the key concerns we have in negotiation. We don't want to feel pushed around or embarrassed. Similarly, an independent criterion is powerful because it helps you reframe. That is, say something important in a positive, palatable way. An independent criterion lets you talk about fairness in a much less irritating way, in effect saying, let's see what's fair together. It invites the other person to change her mind because she's learning new credible information from a source you don't control. And that raises a related point. An independent criterion is also powerful because it helps you address a problem that we'll see lurks around in almost every negotiation, the trust problem. How do I know it's safe to deal with you and that I can rely on your assurances that you won't hurt me? One of the key reasons negotiation is not leisure is because that fear is usually present in negotiation. When you offer an independent criterion, you're addressing the trust problem, offering something that bolsters your credibility in an attractive way. For all these reasons, independent criteria help change things, to the point. A student of mine used an independent criterion in a salary negotiation. A bank he wanted to work for offered $80,000 for him to come over. He was thrilled, but remembered from his training the power of preparation, and so he wisely asked for time to think it over. Then he found a recent Wall Street Journal article reporting that peer banks were often offering their new associates $120,000. So he returned to the hiring executive and said, "I'm very glad for your offer, and I'm confident we'll find a fair compensation that works for everyone. I thought you might like to see this Wall Street Journal article. It says that $120,000 is the going rate now." The hiring executive said, "Thanks for this. I'll be in touch." 2 weeks later, the student got a memo from the executive announcing the bank was raising salaries for all new associates to $125,000. Now, I can't promise you that this course will guarantee you a 55% raise, but how did that student do that? He offered a credible, face-saving, independent criterion and presented it in a respectful, positive way. There are two kinds of independent criteria. One, called a fair standard, is a benchmark from a credible third-party source. Fair standards, including expert opinions, documented market values, reliable studies, well-established precedent, scientific reports, court decisions, widely recognized moral standards, and the like. All of those are fair standards. The key is this: each comes from a credible, mutually acceptable source. A second kind of independent criterion is a fair procedure. Fair procedures are simple, fair decision rules that both sides find reasonable. You've used them since you were a kid. Coin flips, taking turns, eeny, meeny, miny, moe, rock, paper, scissors, and the like are all examples. Here's one of my favorites. I cut, you choose. Here, you offer to divide something and let the other person choose which part she'll take. Since you don't know which half you'll get, you have a built-in incentive to cut fairly. Now you might ask, what if I research an independent criterion and when I share it, the other guy simply rejects it or keeps pressing me? Or what if he dismisses my criteria and insists on his own? And you might go further, arguing, well, what if I want more than a fair deal? What if I want a favorable deal? And moreover, isn't it true that there really isn't such a thing as a truly objective benchmark? There are some ways to address some of these concerns. It's a good idea, for example, to prepare more than one independent criterion in case the other person rejects the first one you suggest. And as we'll see later, it's quite possible and reasonable to use independent criteria in ways that help you achieve a favorable and fair outcome. But as powerful as they are, independent criteria don't always work. In fact, no one idea we'll encounter in this course or any negotiation course always works, which means we'll need an array of ideas to draw on, so that if one idea doesn't work, we're not daunted. We'll have a whole toolkit of strategies, techniques, and principles to draw on. That's one of our key goals for the course. So let me give you the factual research challenge. The next time you're faced with a serious negotiation, see what happens if you spend some time going beyond the obvious, identifying several good questions to ask, and then finding specific answers to them. See what a difference that makes to your confidence, your effectiveness, and your poise in the negotiation that follows. A skilled negotiator who focuses on interests and does her homework is already far ahead of the game. One of the most valuable things a negotiator can do with this work is to get creative with it and so discover hidden solutions that other negotiators never see. It's to that possibility that we turn in our next session.